My name is Justin Chug with Enstable, and today we're going to talk about using experiments to win deals. On our last discussion 2 weeks ago, we actually talked about closing or actually generating more appointments using a different strategy. And so today's discussion is somewhat of a continuation of the last one, which is focused on closing more opportunities and increasing our close ratio, which sometimes it can be somewhat of a challenge. And so oftentimes when we're in the middle of a conversation for closing opportunities, it turns to savings and money and cost. We also talk a lot about features and benefits. Oftentimes these types of conversations will lead our prospects into a comparison scenario where they feel somewhat obligated to compare the products and services from other providers in order to make the right decision. The challenge with this is our brains really aren't well designed for comparing products, especially when it comes to complex abstract solutions. And so we tend to default to pricing and more simplistic versions of the products in order to make decisions, but oftentimes we don't make any decisions at all because it's too difficult to compare the different products and services. But what experimental selling does is it uses a different approach. Rather than focusing on products, we really focus on theories. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to sell an idea or a theory to the decision maker. And so what this does is we're inviting them to experiment something with us, to try something new. But in order to test the theory, the decision maker has to purchase new products. And that's kind of the hook, line, and sinker within this strategy is we're trying to get them to buy into the theory. And as a byproduct, they're going to be purchasing new products in order to actually test the theory. So let me run you through a practical example that might help crystallize this concept a little bit further. So essentially, experimental selling is all about workforce optimization. And so if we can come up with something that can be measured or tested, then that's an experiment that we want to propose to our prospects. So the first step is to come up with a hypothesis. It's important to remember that every business is different, so that even though you've ran the same type of experiments in other organizations, it's always going to be a hypothesis within a new organization because every company is different. And so every time you're testing a theory, it's always going to be a new theory, regardless of how many times you've tested in the past. An example of a theory is the relationship that exists between server performance and customer support. So many companies have actually tested this in the past, and they've found that for every second a customer has to wait for a website to load, it actually increases customer support by 13%. Because what happens is when they don't get the information that they're looking for online, they call support. And so the experiment with your prospect or your customer would be this. You would say, look, other companies have reduced their customer support costs by 13% just by reducing their latency on their websites by 1 second. So if we can invest in new cloud computing solutions, we can run an experiment that will allow us to test this theory and see if it actually works for your business. And so at that point, we would get the decision maker to buy into the theory. Along the same lines, you could also say, look, with that work, now let's try something else. Let's see if we can integrate your chat on your website with your UCaaS solution. And so since their current UCaaS solution may not do that, or maybe you have a better solution that would actually perform something like that, you can say, look, let's see if we can reduce it by another 10 to 15% and see what kind of results we get from actually integrating chat into the UCaaS platform and see what happens from there. And so all of these are different experiments, but it's all presented in the fashion where the decision maker can say, yeah, this looks like a good opportunity. But we can also look at, and we're going to talk about this on another call, but there's also the opportunity to take this even further and say, look, maybe we can integrate the chat and the UCaaS and all these different email platforms into other software applications and see if we can do further workforce optimization. And so everything just becomes an experiment. And the best way that I've seen sales reps present these ideas to these decision makers is they say, look, I have this crazy idea. It's worked for other companies, and I want to see if it would work for a company like yours. I've never tested it here. Would you be interested in doing this? And so what this does is it creates a joint experiment. So by allowing your decision maker to experiment, it also allows them to take credit for the results. This is mainly why we always want to present this as an experiment, because if it's something that you've shown that proves, if you're saying, look, I know this will work, then it takes away the opportunity for them to take credit for it because it's something that you came up with on your own. But if it's an experiment that they're running, then it allows them to become the hero within the company. It also helps reduce their anxiety because of the way that we're presenting this. This isn't a product sell, because if the product it goes south or it's not as good as you say it is, which happens from time to time, the decision maker has less anxiety about looking bad, about purchasing a bad product, because you're presenting this as an experiment. We're saying we don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to do what we can and see where it goes. And so most companies encourage their employees to run experiments, to try new things, and when you present it as something that you're going to try out, and if it fails, it doesn't feel as bad for them. And so they're much more, it's much easier for them to buy into something like that rather than to buy into a new product. You also find that they have a vested interest in making it work. And so this would be something that they're more involved in. There's more incentive for them to actually make the experiments work, to work with sales, to work with customer support, and get everyone's buy-in to actually make this opportunity work for them, because they want to become the hero and it's their baby. And that's why we always want to present this as an experiment. Also, because because a lot of products have now become cloud-based, it's much easier to find suppliers and vendors who are willing to offer free trials. And it reduces the risk even further, but allows you to engage and work with decision makers on a much easier basis. And while this approach will make it much easier to close new opportunities, just because it takes a lot of the pain out of the purchasing process, it allows the decision maker to get the buy-in, and it just greases the wheels on everything. But the greatest value that you would gain from this is the experience, because even though every company is unique, the more times you can prove your experiment works, the easier it will be for other prospects in the future to adopt this type of experiment, and it helps you become a more valuable consultant. And that's one of the greatest benefits from this overall approach, is not only does it make it easier to engage with prospects and to get them to buy into solutions and not go into the over-analysis type product comparison, but it makes it much easier for you to gain credibility in the future, because now you have concrete data and results. And just like we talked about in the beginning, companies have done experiments like this where they've found a relationship between website latency and customer support, and that in general is 13%. It may be 7% for some companies, but it may be 25% for others. But finding that and creating that type of result is so concrete, and the fact that you're measuring it, it's not something where you're dropping off a product and walking away. The results are what you're looking for at the end of the day. And so in our next call, 2 weeks from today, we're actually going to be walking through all the different types of experiments that you can run to sell different products like SD-WAN and UCaaS and fiber and a variety of different solutions, so that you can grease the wheels on all those different types of opportunities. So that's really it for today. If anybody has any questions, feel free to jump into the chat, and I'll stick around and answer them for you. Thanks, everyone. So Susan was asking, well, what if my customers resist experiments? This may be fairly common in the very beginning if you don't have anything to really show. There's lots of different theories and experiments that have already been ran. I'll send out a link to a few books where we interviewed a guy, I can't remember his name, but he ran like 10,000 different sales experiments. They may not necessarily be directly related to some of the products and services that you sell, but they can help give you some ideas. But the idea is to work first with a few companies, maybe smaller companies that you have a good relationship with, and start building momentum with some of the smaller experiments, and then going from there. But once you have some type of concrete information, you'll find that it's much easier to move forward. So hopefully that answers your question, Susan. Are there any other questions before we wrap it up? So one of the questions here is, how do you get the right decision maker to engage in the free trial? Sometimes there are influencers that give their input to the decision maker. So I think that's a great question, and I think we'll probably touch upon this a lot more on the next call. But a lot of times, when we ran experiments internally here in Sable, that we found that it's best not to go directly to the decision maker that would actually own this type of experiments. But you're going to find that a lot of these may be involved directly with customer support, or may be involved with marketing, or it may be IT. But usually you want to work with the organization that's most impacted by the experiment, because they're going to help you champion it. You need someone to champion this for you internally, because if you go to the IT guy, he doesn't care as much about the impact that this has on support, or on marketing, or on customer ratings, or on accounting. And so working directly with those organizations also is much easier to have access to, but they're going to champion a lot more for you. So hopefully that makes sense. No problem. Any other questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, have a great weekend, everyone, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.